The days are finally longer and the flowers are in full bloom. It must be time for the Washington State Spring Fair. Celebrate the return of warmer days by popping on over to Puyallup the weekend of April 10th to 12th and 17th to 19th. Seek thrills on the festival rides, try your hand at carnival games, see some adorable animals, and, my personal favorite, eat too much funnel cake. You can get your tickets at thefair.com, and kids 5 and under are always free, so you can bring the whole family. CityCast Seattle host Jane here. At the end of today's episode, we have a sponsored segment with a special guest, Tom Uniacke from Washington Wild, who's going to talk with me about the work being done to protect Washington's public lands and wild places, and why those efforts matter right now. So stick around after the show to hear how this local group is helping defend the landscapes that make Washington such a special place to live and explore. This is CityCast Seattle. I'm Jane C. Hu, and here's what Seattle's talking about. Happy Local News Day. Of course, we're always talking about local news here on CityCast Seattle, but today we are talking to people who make the news about how they do what they do and what the future of local news looks like in our city. In a nation full of news deserts, we are really lucky here in Seattle to have a local news ecosystem. But we're also going through a period of change as the way people are getting their news changes, especially in ways that don't always generate sustainable revenue to keep outlets going. So joining us to talk about this is Annika Anand. You might know her as a co-founder of the Evergrey, the wildly popular newsletter, which helped me get to know our city better in the mid-2010s. Annika has since worked for Lion, the local independent online news publishers, and is currently building out the Washington State News Alliance. Welcome, Annika.
Thanks for having me.
So what is the goal with this alliance, and why is it necessary right now?
Yeah, so last year, I started talking with a couple of former colleagues, Sarah Gustavus Lim and Linda Shaw, who I both worked with. And we were trying to understand and keep up with what was happening with local news around Washington State, and just found it difficult to do that. And so we talked about starting a newsletter where we could just start pulling stories and maybe start trying to write some original stuff about what was happening. It's called Fresh Ground. And then after a few months, the Washington News Fund, which is a new alliance of philanthropic funders, got in touch with us and they were like, hey, how can we support and expand this work? And so we created the Washington State News Alliance as a way to test building a broader coalition of people who want to support local news in our state. So we're in the really early days of this, and we're actually structuring it as just a year-long project so that we can learn more about what people want to know about supporting local news and figure out the best way to do that through the Alliance's work.
Interesting. So what has been discussed so far? What kind of framework does this alliance provide that might support what local newsrooms need, or in helping trying to get that news to readers or listeners?
What we really found in Washington is that there aren't a lot of journalism-oriented organizations that are just regularly bringing folks together and talking about the work. So work streams that we're prioritizing this year are to expand Fresh Ground with more original reporting, to actually get a convening together where we can bring folks together to talk in person and learn more about what each other is working on. And then the third piece is actually around policy work. So there has been some legislation introduced in the past couple of sessions around getting public dollars to local news. And so we want to help facilitate those and get more people in those conversations so that hopefully by the next session, we can gain a little bit more ground in that conversation since nothing has been passed yet.
Interesting. Yeah, we've talked a little bit on the show about the possibility of news vouchers. If folks don't already know about this, the proposal is similar to democracy vouchers, but it seems like some of those details are still a little up in the air. So, yeah, speaking of funding, it's no secret that journalism everywhere is struggling, but Seattle's local media scene has also seen some pretty big losses recently. So last fall, Cascade PBS laid off long-form journalists. And more recently, the Seattle Met's parent company was sold to another company called Our Media, which is based in Michigan. Are these indicative of the overall trends that we're seeing in local media? kind of this pivot to multimedia or trying to stay solvent by selling to a bigger company?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we are seeing a lot of the same things happening all across the country. And at the same time, we're seeing really promising shoots of new growth and some examples of independent news entrepreneurs, either starting things from scratch or trying to build on and pivot publications that have earned this trust and loyalty in communities.
What are you seeing from these creators or newsrooms that you feel like are things we should emulate? Like, what are folks doing well? And what are you hearing from news consumers in terms of what they want to see?
Yeah, a lot of times we talk about this conversation in terms of like, what's the business model? What's going to be the thing that we need to replicate so that we can just save local news. And the one thing I've learned is that there really is no single business model for local news. But the outlets that are thriving tend to do three things really well. So one is they've diversified their revenue in some sort of ways. They're actually trying to weave together philanthropy, sponsorships, memberships, donors, and even some public funding and public dollars. The second thing that we're seeing is that these publications are really responding to what their audience actually needs. And so they're not just covering their community, they're actually serving the community. The West Seattle blog, they've been doing this for over 20 years. Tracy Record, one of the co-founders, once said that the West Seattle blog wound up doing news just by listening to the needs of their readers and responding to them.
Doesn't get more grassroots than that.
It's pretty, in some ways, it's pretty straightforward. And like you get that sense when you look at the West Seattle blog all the time. There are other outlets around the country that have taken, this idea of responding to audience needs even further. You've got Outlier Media in Detroit and Civic Lex in Kentucky. They're helping people navigate systems and connect to resources and actually, in some cases, really informing local government decisions. So when we talk about civic infrastructure, that's the heart of it, is really figuring out a way for these local news outlets to help facilitate those conversations and interactions with civic life where they live. And I think the final thing is that a lot of these publications that are seeing success are thinking in terms of ecosystems and not silos. So they understand that their readers aren't just getting information from them. This is something that creators and influencers do really well. They understand that folks are swimming in a sea of sources and they're just one voice of many that folks are paying attention to. So I think a lot of the smartest outlets are collaborating because they understand that a rising tide lifts all boats. And there's great examples of that, like from my home state of North Carolina, after a hurricane hit, how public media stations were loaned a reporter to another station just, without even asking. They just built such a strong culture of collaboration. I think ultimately we need local news in all of our communities, and these communities are so wildly different in their size and demographics and needs. So what works in one place isn't always going to work in another place. But the outlets that are thriving, I would say, aren't trying to chase a silver bullet or a universal playbook. They're just obsessing over this one question, which is really just what does this specific community need from us and how do we become impossible to live without?
I love that. I mean, the idea of collaboration over competition seems like just a really important lesson in a lot of ways right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Comparing Washington as a whole to other states, there just isn't quite the same level of, I'd say, coordination or collaboration across local news the way that there are in other states. And it's not a critique necessarily. It's just that I don't know that we've fully built that infrastructure yet. And we're seeing really interesting examples of statewide collaboratives and associations, but like associations plus in other states where they're actually coordinating between newsrooms and trying to help share resources and back-end services. We have this opportunity to have more coordination and conversation across all these different outlets and, all the different people who can be supporting local news and information in Washington state.
So, Annika, you are deep in how the sausage is made and making sure that all of the people who make the sausage are connected with each other. Sorry, I don't know that I want to keep going with this metaphor. However,
it's great. It's totally
my last
working.
My last question for you is, so I would assume that all of our listeners are really invested in the Seattle community. Like, we do hyper local news here at CityCast Seattle. And I found that a lot of the neighbors that we've met are people who care really deeply about news in our city specifically. What do you wish people knew about local news if you had a chance to talk directly to our listeners?
I think that news consumers are in more of a position than ever to really engage with the people they're getting their information from. And I think I want more people to take advantage of that as they can. I think the news outlets and the local news providers, I use that term broadly speaking, who are really interested in getting it right and helping connect people to where they live and, hold government officials accountable and make the city they live in a better place. I think the folks that are really trying to do that right want to hear from news consumers. They want to hear from people in the community. They want to know what they should be doing to better serve their needs, to help them better navigate the city. And so I would just really encourage folks to find those local news journalists, creators, influencers, the people sharing local news and information, and just really engage with them and talk with them and understand how they can be part of this news ecosystem as consumers, because they are. It's not just about the gatekeepers of journalism anymore. We're all information sharers, and I would love to see more people think about how to bring those journalistic values into their ways of engaging and sharing information.
I could not agree more. I mean, I think often people have this idea of like the media, but it turns out we're all just people who also live here and go to the grocery store and go to events around town. And we want to hear from you. I feel like I say this all the time on the show, but listeners, if you all write to us or email us or leave us a voicemail, like we are always listening to those. So you can do that by emailing us at seattle@citycast.fm or calling us at 206-880-3931. Annika Anand, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to learn more about your work, where can they find info?
You can go to Fresh Ground, Washington on Substack, where we'll be posting updates about the Washington State News Alliance and how to get involved.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk with contributor Chase Hutchinson and creative producer Sam J. Leeds about the wild world of freelance journalism and what it adds to our local news ecosystem. When I first moved to Seattle, Town Hall was my lifeline to the city. I went to book talks, panels with interesting local thinkers, and even a concert. If you're looking for something fun to do or to learn something new, you'll find something going on nearly every night of the week at Town Hall, with events spanning civics, science, and arts and culture. They're a nonprofit with a mission to amplify ideas, foster discourse, and connect people through events. And what I love most about Town Hall is that their events are produced by and for the community, and I think that really shines through in their programming. Tickets to most of their events are offered on a sliding scale, and if you're under 22, you're in luck. They even have free tickets for you. If you haven't been, they're located in this gorgeous historic building on First Hill. And on Monday, April 13th, the team from NPR's Planet Money podcast is going to be there with media producer and everyone's TikTok crush, Jack Corbett, and Redfin economist Daryl Fairweather to discuss all things economics, from the silly to the sublime. Get tickets and view the full calendar of events at townhallseattle.org. Most people are used to getting their news from trusted newsrooms, but that's all changing quickly. And even the news that you see from those trusted outlets often come from independent or freelance journalists. Our contributor Chase Hutchinson is one of them. Chase writes and reports regularly for outlets like the Seattle Times, KUOW, and The Stranger, but also national publications. And Chase is here to talk about the freelance life. Welcome, Chase.
So glad to be here, freelancing it up.
Sam J. Leeds, creative producer. You've also freelanced in the past, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I freelanced on and off from like 2019 until I got this job.
Yeah, and I spent the 8 years before I started hosting the show as a freelancer. So, I mean, for many years, I think that there was a slight stigma associated with being independent or freelance, especially within the journalism industry. But as the media landscape has changed, like specifically that people have been laid off and more people are being forced to freelance, I feel like it is way more common now. So I want to hear, how did each of you come into reporting on local news and doing that from an independent or freelance perspective?
I guess reporting on local news for me was sort of happenstance. Like I started out as a producer for long form narrative shows, like kind of This American Lifestyle stories or more investigative stuff. And then as the podcasting industry started to crater, I was living in Seattle and I was like, there's all these cool local stories in my own backyard that I haven't had time to actually go out and spend some time with. In the many ups and downs of getting a contract and being laid off and getting a contract and being laid off, or my contract ending, I just started going and reporting some local stories. One of my favorites was I learned about this giant wind harp that was on Bainbridge Island for many, many years and was like, I want to go see if I can find it because it wasn't on Google Maps. And I went and tracked it down, like talking to various neighbors, asking where it was, and ended up making this piece for KEXP about the wind harp, how it came to be, and sort of why it had fallen into disrepair. And then right after the story came out, the people who had bought the property it was on tore it down.
No!
And as an archives nerd, I was so glad I got to do that story. But yeah, all that to say, I think like telling local stories feels kind of like an honor because for so much of my career, it's been in order to pay the bills, I've had to sort of work at like a much higher level, and getting to actually focus on the place where I live feels, like I feel very lucky.
I think your own curiosity is a great baseline for stories, because if you're wondering about it or you find delight or wonder in it, an audience is definitely going to enjoy that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So Chase, how did you come into freelancing?
Mine was a little bit of a different story, but it comes from a similar place to echo Sam about wanting to cover things locally. I started at the Tacoma News Tribune, now just the News Tribune in Tacoma. Don't ask. It's a whole story. And I actually was a sports clerk. I was there until like 2 a.m. when they used to have a print deadline that late, collecting scores, trying to get little roundups together from football coaches, which, God bless them, not the most loquacious of fellows, where you'll try and say, talk me through that final play. And you'll get the answer, boys got it done. And it's like, no, we need a little bit more than that. Then I began writing kind of more arts and culture, film criticism stuff. That got cut company-wide when the company went through bankruptcy. All of this is public, so I'm okay talking about it. Unionized with my colleagues there, was glad to do that, but then felt I needed to make the jump to do the stuff I want to do. And that was scary to go out into the freelance world. But over the last few years, I've kind of carved out enough to get by locally and elsewhere.
Yeah, that jump is really scary. And I don't think that a lot of people outside of the industry realize how precarious the life of a freelancer is. Like you got to get your own healthcare on the Washington Exchange or have a partner who you can get healthcare through. You don't always know when your next paycheck is going to come. And rates have definitely gotten worse around town. And just nationally, like as publications have folded and their budgets have contracted. But one other big change that I feel like has happened, especially over the last decade, is that people used to be able to vet the credibility of a reporter on the basis of who they were affiliated with, right? Like if you identified yourself as a reporter at the local paper, people kind of knew maybe where you were coming from. Maybe they'd read your stuff before, but you had a little bit of a background check already where people are like, someone has vetted you a little bit. And for better or for worse, you get the reputation that comes with that publication. But I feel like as a freelance journalist, it's difficult to gain that same credibility with people, but there are definitely independent and freelance journalists who are making a name for themselves. A lot of them are on social media, just being more present so people feel like they know their vibe a little bit more. And also complicating things is that there's no certification for who gets to call themselves a journalist or reporter. I'm curious how you all think about how to judge the credibility or the information coming from an independent or freelance journalist.
I would say that it's about the work. I just go back to the work. If the work is rigorous and detailed and robust, it's journalism. I think anyone can learn the skills of this trade, so to speak. There is I think, kind of moment we're in where you need to be a little cautious about anyone just kind of jumping in and saying they're a journalist, because nothing will replace the hard work of actually reporting, which requires, just speaking personally, a lot of phone calls, a lot of building trust with sources, a lot of showing that you're here to listen. Sometimes when people aren't being listened to at all about stories that they think are important or are not being told.
Yeah, something that I've noticed is that I think that there's a gap between what people are reading and what they're understanding about how that information is obtained. And I think as a freelancer or somebody who's trying to build credibility just on your own, transparency goes a really long way. The more that we can start to understand how news gets made, what went into reporting, the better judges we all are of the information we're consuming. And especially at a time where like the sourcing of information is becoming harder and harder to parse. Like, is this real? Was it made up wholesale? Is this pulled from someone else's reporting? Where did they get it? How far along are we in the game of telephone when we're receiving that information? I think that transparency can just be really helpful.
Essentially, what you both are saying is that there's really no magic bullet for judging credibility, right? Like, we just have to keep using our critical thinking. And I think as journalists, really be open and transparent about what our code of ethics is. And I do think that that's like the defining characteristic of what journalism is versus, say, content creation or other forms of connection that the general public now has with people who talk about local goings-ons, is that there is a code of ethics that journalists need to operate under. And, you know, we won't get into all of that here. I feel like that's its own like 2-hour long podcast. But I do feel like, especially as an independent or freelance journalist, you are in reality now competing with a lot of folks who are doing something similar, but might not be exactly journalism, or it might be folks who aren't operating under that same code of ethics, at least not explicitly. I am curious what your relationship is to that and how you think about your role in the context of this larger media ecosystem we have right now.
The means of distribution, I think, come with their own incentive structures. If you're doing like short form video content online and there's certain trending topics that leap to the front, you might cover those in a way they might not deserve. But I also then think on the flip side, and this might be more in my field, there is a desire for credibility and independence. There has been a huge conversation within the criticism space about influencers that get invited to premieres and big events where suddenly every single thing that they get invited to is the best thing they've ever seen. And I think people are starting to see through that and look for those independent voices that they can trust to give an honest opinion. And that's invaluable. That's a thing that I think will never go away.
Yeah, I think to some extent, influencers and people who are trading access to something for coverage of it are essentially just replacing access journalism, which is the sort of fluffy, like, I followed the celebrity around for a day, and because I got access to their life, I have to write about them within the parameters that their PR person gave me. And I think you're right, Chase, like having an audience that knows that you're going to say what you think as a critic versus what you're being told to say is really important. And I think similarly for independent journalists, it's a matter of showing that you're going to report what you find in the story and not necessarily what the editorial board of a publication might limit you on covering or saying about a story. I just think the challenge there is that for folks who are operating completely independently, they may not have the resources that a big name paper or magazine would have. You don't have access to lawyers. You don't have access to fact checkers necessarily. So a lot more of the labor is on you, which means these stories cost you personally a lot more time and money and are just harder to do. So I think we see less of them, and we do see more sort of like light coverage because there's just less resources available at this moment.
Okay, last question for you all. What do freelancers add to the world of local news that others cannot?
I think a lot. I think they add passion and care because the money is certainly not the reason anybody's doing this at this point. They're the ones providing a lot of coverage of things that would go missed otherwise, especially when it comes to arts coverage, which will be where my heart always is.
Okay, so speaking of fun arts and culture coverage, let's take a break. And when we come back, we're going to have Chase give us a rundown of what is happening around town. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. Also, leave us a little review. It's really helpful. And tell your friends about us. You can also get more local news and events delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to our newsletter. Just go to seattle.citycast.fm. And you can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky, and TikTok at CityCast Seattle. And you can watch full episodes of this show on YouTube. Welcome back to Cut to the Chase, our weekly feature where we have contributor Chase Hutchinson walk us through some of the biggest arts and culture stories in our region. So Chase, I heard that $3 Bill Cinema is no longer holding their annual queer film festival or their trans film festival. And I know you are looking into this. What can you tell us about what's happening there?
Well, the important thing I would say up front, they're still hoping to bring it back at some point. When that is a big to be determined. Essentially, and I should have a story up in the Seattle Times, hopefully when people are listening to this, but for the past 30 years, there has been a Seattle queer film festival put on by $3 Bill Cinema. The last few years, they've been at the Egyptian, which is also part of this equation because that's not as easily accessible of space, where they've played films like All of Us Strangers. A couple of years back, that was one of the most critically acclaimed films of the year. They've shown Fancy Dance, which was starring the locally raised actress Lily Gladstone and had local ties through the Northwest Film Forum. They've been a hub for queer cinema, and that is now going away for the time being. There are still festivals happening, like the Seattle Trans Underground Film Festival was born out of the ashes of them merging the Translations Festival, the dedicated trans film festival last year. And that's going to be at the Northwest Film Forum in October. And I would recommend people go to that, as their first year was very exciting with lots of great programming. So there is still queer and trans cinema in the city. It is just that the festival put on by $3 Bill Cinema for the first time in 30 years is not going to be happening this year.
It's a bummer. Is it just a matter of funding, or are they just trying to, conserve resources?
They did point to challenges associated with funding over the last few years, that they had accrued a significant amount of debt that came from expanding, in the words of their board director, into doing too much. And so they're hoping to take a pause because, in her words, they're wanting to continue to exist for the next 30 years. And we're concerned that if they do a big traditional film festival this year, they might find themselves back in a tough spot.
Well, hopefully taking a year off and evaluating how to move forward means that it can come back. And it seems like, there are other local film festivals trying to take up the mantle a little bit as well. Well, in more fun news, Chase, you also covered the weird meme art of Sunday Nobody. I am such a huge fan of Sunday Nobody. I'm just going to put that out there right now. But for those who are not already familiar with his work, who is he and what is he making?
So Sunday Nobody is not his real name.
Yep.
I know his name, but I'm not going to say what his name is. He is a local Seattle, what he would say, meme artist. And I asked him specifically about what that means. And he said, you can call me a postmodern artist. You can call me a charlatan. It's really not my place to say. But he essentially takes and remixes online art or online memes, or does kind of performance art in a way, but I don't even know if that's fully it. The piece I wrote for the Seattle Times primarily focused on him taking a handsome Squidward statue and dropping it in the sea in Greece to confuse future archaeologists by merging it with the discus thrower, which is a famous, iconic, but the original lost statue to time. So he is a very interesting figure. He's not really our Banksy because he does put his face out there in terms of showing the process of how he made everything. But he's kind of becoming this big online presence when it comes to making unique, strange, silly art that he says he wants to have bring joy to people's lives in a very kind of challenging time.
What stands out to me about his work and what has really drawn me in is just dedication to the bit. Like, his whole thing is just like, I had a weird idea and I saw it all the way through. Like, the amount of time and money and effort that he must have had to put into that Squidward statue, which, by the way, Chase, this is now the third time that you have brought a SpongeBob related thing to the show. So I just want to say, clearly you got a SpongeBob thing going on here.
I know. I'm really the SpongeBob correspondent for CityCast Seattle.
That's your new title.
The true hole in freelancing that Chase is filling.
Yeah, that's the value of a freelancer right there. Is bringing
right there.
us all of the best SpongeBob content.
But no, what you're saying that he commits to the bit, that's how he sees it too. It was interesting. He said he doesn't really consider himself to be that creative of a person, but someone who's very good at executing, that he has a plan, that he sees the steps needed, and he then goes through all of them. And the process of it is funny, entertaining, but it reminded me of Nathan Fielder sort of esque things, but then also John Wilson, who's a little bit smaller, but is kind of known for working with Nathan Fielder as well. And I think that's the better point of reference for what he's doing. And he's also going to be doing more things like this in the future. He's going to be doing a funeral for a Taco Bell next month.
Do you know how many people have individually sent me the link to that to that event? Unfortunately, I can't make it, but I did notice a few weeks ago that he had started making these bronze castings of a Taco Bell bag, like the paper bag, and also a drink cup. And I was like, he's up to something. And I think I've heard this is going to be May 2nd, and I think it includes a crying contest. Ugh, I'm so bummed I can't be there, but I am excited to hear how it goes for folks.
I will be there and report back.
Oh, wonderful.
I feel like, Chase, if your brand is SpongeBob, then Jane's is Taco Bell. And so this is really a merging of your two interests.
I don't know what that says about me, but okay. All right, moving on. In other fun news, Chase, you got to talk to Marshawn Lynch about how he is going to be on the upcoming season of Euphoria. Who does he play? Because I kind of hope it's a teenager, since everyone on the show is actually like 30.
He is not playing a teenager, though that would be very funny. And I'm going to be a little vague so as not to spoil what his role is. But he is part of a new, I'll say, illicit business that Rue Zendaya's character gets involved with, where he's a charming kind of supporting player who is the muscle, but also the quick-witted, very funny presence who makes quite an impression right out of the gate, and every scene he gets, he steals to me. And I don't think he's been asked much about his acting and his craft. I think he kind of becomes content fodder in a way that does him a disservice. He wants to be taken seriously, to be directed as a actor, not just a football player, even as he views there being kind of some crossovers in very funny ways. But yeah, he's probably the most well-known Seattle athlete turned actor.
I mean, I love that for him. It seems like I always really respect it when someone has made their name doing like one very specific thing, and then they're like, you know what? Let me try and ride this into something else. Like, let me actually try and get better at a completely different thing.
I think the joy of it is that he's actually good at it. Like, I mean, it's fun to watch anyone try something new and branch out, but it's especially fun when the second thing that they're doing is also something that they're very good at.
Yeah.
He's just too talented.
It's not fair. It's like Michelle Zauner being Japanese breakfast in the music that she makes, but then also writing Crying in H Mart, which is one of the best memoirs I've read in the last decade. It's like so much talent in one person. All right. Well, before we get too much further off track. Happy Local News Day, you all. If you want to support the work that we are doing, remember that you can always join us as a CityCast Seattle neighbor. So this week, we are actually launching a new perk for our neighbors, which is a bonus segment, and you can catch that tomorrow. We're going to be talking about that new high-rise development in Denny Triangle with the Boeing plane in between. So if you want to hear us gab about that, you can sign up as a CityCast Seattle neighbor at membership.citycast.fm/Seattle. And thank you guys for listening. And thank you, Chase Hutchinson, our SpongeBob correspondent, for bringing us the latest SpongeBob news.
Always happy to do so.
And Sam J. Leeds, thank you so much for being here. You need a special title now that I'm... What kind of correspondent would you be?
I think, we've got some segments coming soon where I'm going to be the archives correspondent.
That's true. You're our your resident archives nerd, Sam J. Leeds. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Glad to, remove my head from a dusty book and come on mic.
And last but not least, Tom Uniacke from Washington Wild will be joining us for a conversation sponsored by Washington Wild. Hey, it's Jane here with Tom Uniacke, the executive director of Washington Wild. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Jane. Thanks for talking with me today.
Of course. Okay, so to start things off, I really want to know, who is Washington Wild?
Yeah, so Washington Wild is a statewide conservation organization. We are a nonprofit. We've been around since 1979, so that's over 40 years. And our mission is to protect and defend Washington's wildlands and waters. So that includes Rainier National Park or the Glacier Peak Wilderness. And in fact, we did a mapping exercise where we took the 25 most populous cities in the United States, which includes Seattle, and we did a 100-mile radius around what those cities are. And we looked at how much designated wilderness has been protected within that area. And it turns out that Seattle is number one of all those cities, and it's not close. 3.6 million acres of protected wilderness within 100 miles of Seattle. The second place cities are Denver and Phoenix, and they're about half that amount.
What are some wins that Washington Wild has been behind that Seattleites might recognize?
Most recently, we were leading a coalition that resulted in designating the Wild Sky Wilderness, which is 106,000 acres. That took an act of Congress. So it took 6 years to really make that happen. But it is the highest level of protection on our federal land. In 2014, we were involved in a similar congressional legislation in Washington, D.C. that protected additions to the Alpine Lakes Wilderness. We also designated 2 wild and scenic rivers as part of that legislation. So these things in Congress, they go slow, and statewide organizations like us, patience is really an important factor.
So tell us a little bit more about these protections. Like, what is protected as a result of this work from Washington Wild?
A lot of these lands are on national forest lands, and a lot of the public is kind of pretty familiar with national parks. They have a very strong conservation mandate. National forests are equally incredible, federal public lands, but they have a multiple use mandate, which means that those national forest lands can be managed to be logged, drilled, or mined, or as wilderness. It totally depends on policy, legislation. So we spend a lot of time making sure that our forest lands are managed in the appropriate way.
So I know that right now we're seeing a lot of changes in the federal government, including rolling back some protections. What role does Washington Wild have in protecting our wild places right now in the state of Washington?
It's really a tale of 2 Washingtons, Washington, D.C. and Washington State. So since 2025, Washington Wild has been spending a lot of energy playing defense. And there have been a lot of proposals from Washington, D.C. and the Trump administration that are looking to basically weaken or eliminate protections for our national parks, forests, wildlife refuges, and other public lands. Those include proposals in Congress to sell off national parks and forests. We were able to stop, as a national bipartisan coalition, an effort in the budget bill last July. Also, there are efforts to weaken these bedrock environmental laws that were kind of designated in the 70s, like the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. So we're seeing that happen, and different administrative regulations or rules. Those are under repeal administratively. So we are very busy, and we've done this before, but yeah, a lot of the last year has been having to play defense. But at the same time, we're making sure to recognize the fact that we live in Washington state, and there are still opportunities in our state to protect lands through state opportunities, right? So for example, we just nominated 4 new rivers to be designated as outstanding resource waters through the Department of Ecology just last month. And we're going to work over the next year or two to make sure that those get designated.
Well, where can people find more info about Washington Wild and how to support your work?
You can go to wawild.org. You can sign up for a monthly e-newsletter where we'll share successes, information, calls to action. So keep you up to date. We're on Facebook and Instagram. So just look under Washington Wild.
Amazing. Tom, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's a pleasure to chat with you.
All right. Again, listeners, you can check out wawild.org to learn more. And we'll have that link for you in our show notes as well. So you're just a click away. Thanks so much for listening. That's all for today here at CityCast Seattle. I'm your host, Jane C. Hu. Thank you again to our listeners for writing in. And listeners, remember that we love hearing from you all. If you all have news tips, questions, reactions to anything we talk about on this show, we love hearing from you all. Just email us at seattle@citycast.fm. You can also text us or leave us a voicemail on the CityCast hotline at 206-880-3931. Until next time, see ya, Seattle.